Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
Prabhu.
Yes. Okay. Then let me begin. Om Jnana-timirandhasya Jnananjana-salakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Katamayam Dadhi Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalan Shri Guru Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagna Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Cha Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvisesha Sunyavadi Pashyatya Desatarane Panchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Yevacha Patidanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dīnabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासादि गौर भक्त वृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. So we are reading chapter 31 from Śrīla Prabhupāda-līlāmṛta volume 1. A threat against ISKCON, Boston, December 21st, 1969. More than 100 of Prabhupada's disciples and followers are in the lobby of the international terminal of Boston's Logan Airport. Kirtanananda Swami has come from New Vrindavan with a truckload of devotees. The devotees from New York are here with a large banner, New York ISKCON welcomes Srila Prabhupada. Most of the devotees wear heavy coats over their dhotis and saris and are chanting Hare Krishna. Some play drums and cymbals. A few babies and children are present. Waiting passengers can only watch startled. Prabhupada's plane is late and the devotees continue chanting, often leaping into air with outstretched arms. They haven't seen Prabhupada in a long time and they are waiting, expecting to see him at any moment. Oblivious of the properties of being in public, the devotees chant emotionally, building almost to uncontrolled ecstasy. The state police step in to tell the biggest devotee, Brahmananda, cool it. The chanting falls away to a murmur of japa. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. The plane from London arrives. The devotees are unable to see the passenger entering in the glassed-in immigration and customs area because the bottom 6 feet of glass wall is painted black. Straining to see over the top, the devotees press forward, chanting feverish, some almost hysterical. Suddenly they see Prabhupada's raised hand with bead bag on the other side of the wall. They can see only his raised hand and bead bag. They go wild. Fearlessly, With drums and kartals, the kirtan explodes again. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare. Advaita is tearfully smashing the kartals together and chanting. Brahmananda, jumping up and down, trying to glimpse into the customs room, is crying uncontrollably and yelling, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, free of customs, suddenly appears before them. Kirtananda Swami, reserved until now, leaps around airport chairs and runs to him. Everyone is pushing and running, trying to be where Prabhupada is. Prabhupada's saffron robes are wrinkled from the long flight, and he wears a knit sweater. He holds his white plastic attack case in his left hand, and again raises his right arm with forefinger and thumb extended from the bead bag. He smiles wonderfully, beaming to his children. Devotees cheer and cry, All glories to Srila Prabhupada. As he walks towards a saffron-covered sofa in the airport lounge, the devotee move with him in an ecstatic wave, pressing in close. He sits down. Paramananda from New Vrindavan comes forward with his infant son, the first boy born in ISKCON, and holds him forward to Prabhupada for blessings. Prabhupada is smiling, and the devotees are completely unabashedly blissful. Where is Hayagriva? Prabhupada asks. The question is repeated by devotees, and big Hayagriva lurches through the crowd, grumbling and falling flat at Prabhupada's feet in obeisances. One by one, the leaders of various ISKCON centers come forward and place garland after garland around Prabhupada. Prabhupada looks beyond the wall of devotees at the newsmen with their cameras and at the baffled, curious, and disdainful onlookers. A bystander says, I think he must be some kind of a politician. So Prabhupada begins speaking. Spiritual master is to be worshipped as God. But if he is thinking that he is God, then he is useless. My request is please don't take Krishna consciousness as a sectarian religion. Prabhupada explains that Krishna consciousness is a great science, culminating in pure love of God. These boys and girls had never heard of Krishna before, Prabhupada continues, but now they have taken it up so naturally because it is natural. Prabhupada says that he is an old man, yet he is sure that even if he passes away, his students, even if he passes away, his students will continue the Krishna consciousness movement. The potency of this movement is such that it can awaken awareness of God within anyone's heart. After the lecture, Prabhupada stands and is escorted outside where a limousine waits to drive him off through the newly fallen snow. Riding joyfully in the car with Prabhupada were Kirtananda Swami, Brahmananda, Satsvarupa, and Purushottama. A professional chauffeur drove. Prabhupada talked of London. It was an old aristocratic city, he said, and the temple was in a very influential area near the British Museum. The location is, what is it called? Downtown? They passed a large billboard advertising a restaurant and lawn, Continental. On seeing the billboard, Prabhupada said, Chintamani, what is that? Oh no, Continental. The devotees looked at one another, Chintamani. Prabhupada had thought that the sign had read Chintamani, meaning the spiritual gems that make up the transcendental land of Krishnalok. But Prabhupada himself was Chintamani, pure and innocent, coming to the cold, dirty city of Boston, yet always thinking of Krishna wherever he was. How fortunate to be with him. Satsvarupa glanced at the professional chauffeur. Drive carefully, he said. Prabhupada spoke softly from the back seat, while the devotees in front peered back, barely able to see him in the darkness and completely awed by his friendly yet inconceivable presence. The other day, he said, I told George Harrison that if he thought his money belonged to him, that was Maya. At the Sumner Tunnel, the limousine pulled up at an automatic toll booth. The driver threw a coin into the chute and the red light turned green. Prabhupada asked if sometimes people drove through without paying, and Brahmananda replied that an alarm would go off. They moved ahead into the Sumner Tunnel, usually an airy, nerve-wracking place, but not when riding with Prabhupada. I told George to give his money to Krishna, Prabhupada said. Not that he had to give it to Krishna by giving it to me. necessarily, but that somehow or other he must spend all of his money for Krishna. But you are the only way to Krishna, Brahmananda said. Prabhupada laughed lightly. Yes, he admitted, at least in the West. This was a great privilege of being able to ride with Prabhupada, to hear him say little things or serious things and to see his fathomless expression or his kind smiling. It was a rare opportunity. I was representing unadulterated teachings, Prabhupada continued. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, surrender to me and I shall surrender to Krishna. And I say, surrender to Krishna. It is very simple. So many Swamis come and present themselves as Krishna and it is all spoiled. But I say surrender to Krishna. I do not say anything new or adulterated. Krishna says surrender to me, and I say surrender to Krishna. Prabhupada asked Brahmananda if 50,000 copies of Bharat to Godhead magazine were being printed. Brahmananda answered that they were good. Prabhupada replied, turning his attention to Satsvarupa. Prabhupada asked how the composing machine was working, and Satsvarupa said that hundreds of pages were being composed each month. Prabhupada asked Kirtananda Swami about New Vrindavan. New Vrindavan would improve, Prabhupada said. The only thing wrong was that it got blocked up with winter. Each devotee in the car felt completely satisfied by his brief exchange with Prabhupada, and they rode with him intoxicated in spiritual bliss. Most of the devotees had raced ahead to the temple on Beacon Street and were waiting excitedly. The limousine pulled um, up, and again the devotees were unrestrained in their adoration of their spiritual master. Regally, Prabhupada walked up the walkway onto the porch tree steps, through the front door, and into the vestibule, where he gazed around at the purple walls and the pink and green doorways. Surrounded by cheers and loving looks, he smiled. The second floor parlor, now the temple room, was filled with more than 150 disciples and guests, and they could see Prabhupada's form rise into view as he came up the stairs. He still carried his white attack case in his left hand and his bead bag in his right. And although he had just come out of the winter's night, he wore no coat, only cotton robes and a sweater. He appeared radiant. Prabhupada approached the altar. He seemed to notice everything. The small Radha Krishna deities enthroned beneath a red velvet canopy, the larger deities of Jagannath, Subhadra, and Baladev on a raised shelf above the picture of Lord Chaitanya and his Sankirtan party, even the brass arati paraphernalia brightly shining on the small table near the altar. Turning to his secretary and traveling companion Purushottama, he asked, what do you think, Purushottam, isn't this very nice? Crossing the room, Prabhupada sat on the red velvet Vyasasan. He spoke and the audience were attentive. After praising the London Centre, the deity worship there, the expertly made puris of Radha for Radha and Krishna, he turned toward the altar and said, if you clean the deities' utensils, your heart will become cleansed. By polishing the deities' paraphernalia, he said, the devotees were cleaning their spiritual master's heart also. As he spoke, focusing simply and purely on devotion to the deity, the devotee suddenly realized the importance of this aspect of their Krishna consciousness. Their Krishna consciousness. Who has made these clothes? Prabhupada asked, glancing at Radha and Krishna's little flounced dress. Sharadiya, a few devotees called out. Prabhupada smiled. Thank you very much. Then he threw back his head and laughed. Is Sharadiya still fighting with her husband? The devotees and guests laughed, while Sharadiya covered her face with her hands. Don't fight with your husband, Prabhupada said. He is a good boy. Anybody that comes to Krishna consciousness is good. He then asked to see the rest of the house. 100 devotees, straining to see and hear Prabhupada's responses, followed him as he went downstairs. Although the crowd surrounded him, he remained relaxed and unhurried. He entered the press room, a long hall directly beneath the temple room. A large old offset press, a paper cutter, a folder, flats of paper stock filled the room, which smelled like a print shop. Advaita, the press manager, bowed down in his green khakis before Prabhupada. He rose up smiling. And Prabhupada stepped forward and embraced him, putting his arm around Advaita's head. Very good, he said. Standing before the printing press, Prabhupada folded his palms together and offered a prayer to his spiritual master. Jaya Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. Advaita asked Prabhupada to give the press a transcendental name. ISKCON Press, Prabhupada said, matter-of-factly, as if it had already been named. Keep all the machines very clean, Prabhupada said, and they will last a long time. This is the heart of ISKCON. You are the heart of ISKCON, Prabhupada, a devotee said. And this is my heart, said Prabhupada. Leaving the main press room, Prabhupada toured the other press facilities, squeezing in, ducking under, standing on tiptoe. The crowd of devotees followed him step by step. He peeked into a little cubbyhole where a devotee was composing type. The typesetter, he said, should proceed very slowly at first, and in that way they would become expert. Turning to Advaita, he said, everyone is in India who speaks Hindi has a Gita press publication. So everyone who speaks English should have an ISKCON press publication. Compared to most authors, Prabhupada's literary contribution was already substantial, but he wasn't just an author. His mission was to flood the world with literature glorifying Lord Krishna. Prabhupada's ISKCON was now 3 years old, yet his disciples were only beginning to execute his plans for printing and distributing transcendental literature. Printing was an important step, the first step. Months ago, Prabhupada had written, the press must work on continuously and we should produce immense volumes of literature. If the press goes on nicely, I shall be able to give you material for publishing a book every 2 months. We have got so much material for the Krishna consciousness movement. And just prior to come to Boston, he had written some Kirtan and distributing back to Godhead and our other literatures is the field work of this movement. Temple worship is secondary. Now ISKCON was printing 50,000 copies of Back to Godhead per month, and Prabhupada hoped to increase the sales more and more. Standing in the crowded, chilly basement surrounded by devotees, press machines, and transcendental literature, Prabhupada described how he wanted ISKCON Press to operate. He said that after dictating a tape, he would mail it to Boston to be transcribed. The transcription should take no more than 2 days. During the next 2 days, someone would edit the transcribed manuscript. Then another editor would take 2 days to edit the transcript a second time. A Sanskrit editor would add diacritical markings and the manuscript would be ready for composing. Prabhupada said he could produce 15 tapes, 300 manuscript pages every month. At that rate, ISKCON Press should produce a book every 2 months or 6 books in a year. Prabhupada wanted to print at least 60 books. Therefore, his press workers would have plenty to do for the next 10 years. If the devotees simply printed his books incessantly, he said, even if they had to work 24 hours a day in shifts, it would give him great delight. He was ready, if necessary, to drop all his activities except for publishing books. This was a special nectar the press devotees were hankering to hear. Printing books was Prabhupada's heart. It was the thing most dear to him. During Prabhupada's week in Boston, Purushottama continued as secretary and servant out of duty. His difficulties in London had increased. Doubtful and morose, he came before Prabhupada 2 days before their departure. Purushottam. I had decided to live in uh, London. I just felt like there were different things I wanted to do. But I felt obligated to stay with him because he needed me there. It was my job to at least get him back to the States. I felt that he needed me there. He needed someone to travel with him. And I just felt that I should complete that, have everything in order, so I couldn't say to myself that I had just quit when he needed me like that in a foreign country. I didn't tell anybody. I didn't speak against him or anything. I performed my duties, but in my attitude, I let him know I was really getting kind of distant the last few days. I didn't bow down to him. I would come in, but I just wouldn't bow down to him. He entered Prabhupada's room. He didn't bow down. He stood. He was too uncomfortable to sit because of the gravity of what he would say. Prabhupada looked up from his desk. Yes, Purushottam? Purushottam. I went in to see him. I knew I was going to leave, and it kind of made me sick to do it. Anyway, I told him I have a lot of questions about the movement, the moon, and everything. I just don't believe all of this. He was very congenial about the whole thing. He took it nicely. He said to me, if you have questions, why don't you ask me? And I said, you yourself have said that we should only ask questions to somebody we feel we can believe or trust. He looked very hurt. He knew what I was saying. I felt like I really hurt him. I didn't mean it to be so defiant, but there I was. He said, I have noticed that you haven't been well lately. You had some problems? I said, well, I haven't been trying to hide it. I guess I was trying to prepare him for what was coming. I wanted to leave that night. So I said, I want to leave. But he said to me, you have been with me so long and now you are so anxious to go? You can't even stay a night? He said, why don't you stay at least till my plane leaves? That was 2 days later. I said, okay, I'll do that then. I was going to go back to go back to New York. Actually, I didn't have the money for the ticket and he gave me the money. He gave me the bus fare. I really appreciated that. I could have borrowed some money from someone else, but he said, well, you take it and you can pay me back later. And I did. I gave it back the next week. He was very gracious about the whole thing. Actually, I could see that he had a very special loving way of looking at the world. I felt that sometimes I could see things in a loving way like he did, and I realized that I got that viewpoint from him. You know, that little loving spirit. He had that, and I kind of caught some of that from him. And that's one of the things I always remember about him. I know that through his movement, I came to believe in God. Before I met him, I didn't believe in God. After Purushottama left, Prabhupada spoke with Bhavananda about Purushottama's doubts concerning the moon landing and his consecutive doubts of Krishna consciousness. I can understand that he might not accept it because I said it, but how could he disbelieve the Vedic Shastras? Boston weather was miserable. When the rain stopped, the snow fell, and when the snow stopped, the rain came again. Prabhupada tried taking a walk in front yard. Bhavananda, beside him with the umbrella, watching cautiously to guard him from falling on the ice. But after a week of Boston's nasty December weather, Prabhupada's cold was getting worse. He would go to Los Angeles. Los Angeles, February 25th, 1970. On the auspicious occasion of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's appearance day anniversary, the Los Angeles devotees received permission to enter their new temple on Vatseka Avenue. The rooms had not even been cleaned and the large hall was bare, but the devotees brought in Prabhupada's Vyasasan from the old temple on La Cienega, and Prabhupada had them place on it a large picture of his spiritual master. Standing before his spiritual master, Prabhupada offered arati while some 50 disciples gathered around him, chanting Hare Krishna and dancing in otherwise empty hall. After the arati, Prabhupada directed his disciples in offering flowers to the picture of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Then, still standing before the Vyasasan, he said he had nothing to offer his spiritual master on this day except his own disciples. He then read aloud the names of all his disciples. Taking his seat on a low Vyasasan beside the large Vyasasan of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Prabhupada gave a short history of his Guru Maharaj, son of Bhaktivinoda Thakur and powerful Acharya of the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Um, as Prabhupada recalled his first meeting with his spiritual master, he told how Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had told him to teach Krishna consciousness to the English-speaking world. This large new temple, Prabhupada said, had been provided by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati as a gift for the devotees to use in Krishna's service. They should not become attached to the opulence, Prabhupada said, but they should use this wonderful place for preaching. As he spoke, he wept. Now bring them prasadam. Prabhupada called and the feast began. While devotees sat on the floor in rows, Prabhupada from his Vyasasana directed the servers, having them bring another samosa to one devotee, more chutney to another, and so on. He watched over all of them, encouraging them to take Krishna's prasadam. That afternoon, Prabhupada toured the building. In addition to the main hall, which he would have the devotees convert into temple, he saw the equally large lecture hall. These rooms, plus a three-room apartment, ample separate quarters for male and female devotees, a parking lot, and a front lawn, made this the finest physical facility in all of ISKCON. We don't require such a nice place for ourselves, Prabhupada told the temple president Gargamuni. We are prepared to live anywhere, but such a nice place will give us opportunity to invite gentlemen to come and learn about this Krishna consciousness. The cost of the building had been 225,000 with a 50,000 down payment. Prabhupada had had more than 10,000 in his book fund, but that was exclusively for printing books. So although he usually didn't like to deal personally in such negotiations, he had made an exception in this case, and he asked the other temples to donate to the new world headquarters in Los Angeles. He had even mailed snapshots of the buildings to various temple presidents around the world. Thus, he had collected the down payment, and on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati appearance day, ISKCON became the legal owner. This was the only temple ISKCON actually owned. All the other buildings were leased or rented, and Prabhupada wanted to design everything himself. Hiring professionals would be too expensive, but Prabhupada had plenty of disciples eager to do renovation. Karandara knew a little carpentry, plumbing, and general construction, and he could learn more by experience. Bhavananda had been a professional designer, and he was filled with Prabhupada's enthusiasm to transform the plain church into a dazzling palace for the Supreme Personality of Godhead. First, you make my apartment, Prabhupada told Bhavananda. Let me move in, and then we will work on the temple room. Bhavananda. We picked out a part of Los Angeles temple for Prabhupada's quarters, and Karandhara built a bathroom. When Prabhupada came up to the room, he said, "This will be my sitting place. This will be my bedroom." And when he came to a third room, which is with a skylight, he said, "This will be my library." Prabhupada had told me once in Boston that as a child he had lived in a palace with blue walls, red marble floors, and orange and gold trim, the Mulik's house in Calcutta. So we painted the walls of his sitting room blue, and I put in a white tile floor. The drapes were burnt orange satin with gold cords and gold fringes. Prabhupada liked this color scheme very much. In the bedroom, I asked Prabhupada where he wanted his bed, and he said, "Put the bed in the middle of the room." We had put down a rug, and Prabhupada said, "Now you should get sheets and cover the rug with them." In India, they had rugs like this, nice rugs, and they cover them with sheets. And on special days, they take the sheets off, otherwise they would become ruined. So I went out and bought sheets. Prabhupada was in his sitting room when I came in and started putting the sheet over the rug in the bedroom. Prabhupada came in and said, "Yes, this is very nice. Again, I have introduced something new. This is something new for all of you. Sheets on rugs." Then he told me, "Now make sure there are no wrinkles in the sheet." I was on my hands and knees on the rug, and Prabhupada also got down on his hands and knees right next to me. We were both pressing out the wrinkles from the sheet, and when we got to the end, Prabhupada folded the sheet under the rug. He was very happy there because it was our own place. We had never had our own place before. In the temple room, Prabhupada showed Karandar where to build the three altars. He indicated the measurements and instructed that before each altar should be a pair of doors, and over them the symbols of Vishnu, a conch shell over the altar for Guru, and Gauranga, a wheel and uh, club over Radha and Krishna's altar in the center, and a lotus over Lord Jagannath's. The spiritual master Vyasasan was to go to at the opposite end of the temple, facing Radha and Krishna. The walls should be yellow, which Prabhupada said was in the mode of goodness. The ceiling should be covered with a canopy, and there should be a chandelier. Once the altar were completed, Prabhupada wanted to bring the deities, even though much of the renovation was yet unfinished. After constructing an umbrella-covered cart and decorating it with flowers, the devotees brought the deities in procession from the old temple on La Cienega Boulevard to their new home, Bhavananda. The first time he came into the temple room after his morning walk, he went to the Guru Gauranga altar and paid his obeisances. We all paid our obeisances. Then he stood up and he went to Radha and Krishna and then paid obeisances. Then to Jagannath and we all followed. Then we walked back and he sat on his Vyasasan and he told us, now you line up facing each other from the Vyasasan to Radha Krishna, face each other. This way, that way, one way you look is Guru and the other way God. And then back and forth. That way, always leave this easel, he said, so I can see. The deity was the king, Prabhupada said, and all the temple residents were his personal servants. The temple therefore should be like a palace. An elaborate temple was important for preaching, Prabhupada explained, because most people, especially Westerners, were not inclined to undergo any austerities for obtaining spiritual life. There was an Indian saying, no one listens to a poor man. Were the devotees to advertise class on Bhakti Yoga in such and such empty field under a certain tree, Prabhupada said, no one would come. But a clean, beautiful building with chandeliers and comfortable rooms would attract many people to visit and become purified. The temple was also for those who wanted to live there as Krishna conscious devotees. Devotees, Prabhupada said, should be willing to live and sleep anywhere, but as the loving, protecting father of his disciples, Prabhupada took great care to establish a large temple and an adequate dormitory facilities. He was making a house for his family. To see that his spiritual children had a place to live and practice their devotional service was just another aspect of his mission. A special feature of the new temple was Srila Prabhupada's garden. The devotees had excavated a large patch of concrete behind the temple, filled it in with earth, surrounded it with a cinder block wall, and planted a lawn with flower gardens all around. Karandar. I had dug some beds along the inside perimeter and planted a plant here and a plant there. But Prabhupada said, no, plant something everywhere. Everywhere there should be something growing. Everywhere there is a place, you plant something. Let there be growing everywhere. He wanted it overgrown like a jungle or tropical area where plants just grow luxuriantly everywhere. Srila Prabhupada always enjoyed sitting in the garden in the evening with the fresh, cool evening air and the fragrance of the flowers. The topics of conversation in the garden were as varied as Srimad Bhagavatam, all different subjects. Sometimes there would be lively conversations with guests or devotees, and sometimes Prabhupada would spend the entire time just chanting with very little conversation. Sometimes Prabhupada would just have somebody read from the Krishna book. Prabhupada said that his mother maintained a garden on the roof of their house when he was young and that he would go up there in the evenings and play. He remembered that. He always remembered what he liked to do as a child. You would hear him reminisce with pleasure about it. Many times he would comment, my mother maintained a garden on the roof of our residence, and as a child I would go there in the evening and play. Now I also have such a nice place to come. Under Prabhupada's personal direction, the Los Angeles Center became a model for rest of ISKCON. At the morning Bhagavatam class, for example, he had the devotees responsively chant the Sanskrit mantras after him, and he asked that his become the standard program in all his temples. In May 1970, he wrote to each of his 26 temple presidents throughout North America and Europe, inviting them to visit him at Los Angeles. Now, at the present moment, I am concentrating my energy in this Los Angeles center as ideal for all other centers in respect for deity worship. Aro- Arotrik, Kirtan, and other necessary paraphernalia. As I have curtailed my moving program, I wish that you may come here at your convenience and stay here for a few days and see personally how things are going on. And by meeting with me personally for necessary instruction, I hope simultaneously in all centers the activities will be of the same standard. The temple presidents who visited Prabhupada, most of them young men in their 20s, came with practical as well as philosophical questions. They came with their notebooks, writing down everything from the temple schedule to color schemes, noting the tunes used in the kirtans, learning how to manage a Sankirtan party, and perhaps most important of all, they would note the things Prabhupada did and the words he spoke personally to them. The temple presidents would then return to their own centers in Berkeley or Hamburg or Toronto or Sydney, glowing with ecstasy and ready to implement dozens of new standards they had imbibed from Prabhupada at Los Angeles World Health Headquarters. After Prabhupada although Prabhupada still spoke of expanding his movement more and more, he seemed content to stay in Los Angeles, reaching the rest of the world through his temple presidents, his Sankirtan parties, and his books. New plans were unfolding, however, and Prabhupada again spoke of a governing body, 12 hand-picked disciples to manage all of ISKCON's affairs. He also spoke of initiating more sannyasis and taking them with him to India to train as itinerant preachers. And to ensure that his books were regularly and properly printed, he wanted to form a special committee in charge of book publication, sometimes managing his worldwide religious movement, sometimes leading the growing group of devotees in chanting Sanskrit mantras in Los Angeles temple, and sometimes sitting alone and translating in the pre-dawn hours. Prabhupada lived happily in Los Angeles. One day, a record arrived from London. The London devotees, who, with George Harrison's help, had already produced an album, had now also released a new single, Govinda. The song consisted of verses Prabhupada had taught them from Brahma Samhita, each verse ending with the refrain Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. Prabhupada asked that the record be played during the morning program in the temple. The next morning, after he had entered the temple room, bowed down before the deities, and taken his seat on the Vyasasana to begin the class, the record began. Suddenly, Prabhupada became stunned with ecstasy. His body shivered, and tears streamed from his eyes. The devotees, feeling a glimmer of their spiritual master's emotion, began to chant Hare Krishna as if chanting japa. The movements seemed to pass slowly. Finally, Prabhupada spoke, Govindam Adipurusham Tamaham Bhajami. He was again silent. Then he asked, Is everyone all right? The response was a huge roar, Jai Prabhupada, and he began the Srimad Bhagavatam class. Vaishnavera Kriya Mudra Vigye Na Bujhaya. Bujhaya. No one can understand the mind of Vaishnava. Only a pure devotee can understand another pure devotee perfectly. But by observing the main activities of Prabhupada's life, we can see that whatever he did was pure service to Lord Krishna and was a perfect example of how to surrender to Krishna. He taught by precept and by example, often encouraging, even praising his disciples. He always pushed them into more and more participation in the blissful Sankirtan movement of Lord Chaitanya. But he also exposed the faults of his disciples, and these faults were sometimes great and painful to see, both for him and for his disciples. One day, as Prabhupada came into his quarters at Los Angeles Temple, he saw that one of the devotees cleaning his room had placed his picture upside down. A simple mistake, but it indicated something wrong in the disciples' mentality. Every morning, the devotees sing prayers to the spiritual master, honoring him as the direct representative of God. How could any sincere disciple not notice that he is standing God's representative upside down? Then a more serious discrepancy. Prabhupada went to the temple, greeted the deities, and went to take Charanamrita, the scented water, from the bathing of the deities. It was part of his daily schedule. After his morning walk, he would return to the temple and offer obeisances to the deities while the Govinda record was being played. A devotee would then offer him a few drops of Charanamrita in his right palm and he would sip it. He had mentioned this item of devotion service in the Nectar of Devotion. Scented with pure perfume and flowers, the water comes gliding down through his lotus feet and is collected and mixed with yogurt. In this way, this Chernamrit not only becomes very tastefully flavored but also has tremendous spiritual value. The devotees who come to visit and offer respects to the deities take 3 drops of Chernamrit very submissively and feel themselves happy in transcendental bliss. On this particular morning, however, as Srila Prabhupada took Charanamrit, he frowned. Someone had put salt in it. He walked the length of the temple room, took his seat on Vyasasana before a room full of 100 devotees, asked, "Who has put salt in Charanamrit?" A young girl in a sari stood and in a nervous smile said she had done it. Why have you done it? Prabhupada asked gravely. I don't know, she giggled. Prabhupada turned to Gargamuni. Get someone responsible. Everyone present felt Prabhupada's anger. The unpleasant moment marred the pure temple atmosphere. A disciple worships Krishna by pleasing Krishna's representative, the spiritual master. Therefore, to displease the spiritual master was a spiritual disqualification. The spiritual master was not merely a principle, he was a person, Srila Prabhupada. When ISKCON Press in Boston misprinted Prabhupada's name on a new book, he became deeply disturbed. The small paperback chapter from the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam bore his name on the cover as simply A.C. Bhaktivedanta. Omitted was the customary His Divine Grace, as well as Swami Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada's name stood almost divested of spiritual significance. Another ISKCON Press publication described Prabhupada as Acharya of ISKCON, although Prabhupada had repeatedly emphasized that he was the founder Acharya. There had been many Acharyas or spiritual masters, and there would be many more, but His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada was the sole founder Acharya of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. To make matters worse, when Prabhupada first opened the new Bhagavatam chapter, the binding cracked and the pages fell out. Prabhupada groveled. The devotees in Boston, hearing Prabhupada's anger, knew at once that their mistake in misprinting Srila Prabhupada's name was a serious oversight. Minimizing the spiritual master's position was a grave offense, and they had even published the offense. The serious implications were difficult for the devotees to face, and they knew they would have to rectify their mentality before they could make spiritual progress. Prabhupada criticized the mentality behind these mistakes, and his criticism were instructive to his disciples. Unless he instructed them about the absolute position of the spiritual master, how would they learn? At the beginning of the Srimad Bhagavatam class one morning, Prabhupada called on one of the women devotees. Nandarani, she stood respectfully. Do you chant 16 rounds every day? Well, I try to, Prabhupada. This is the problem, Prabhupada said, turning to the temple president. If Nandarani, one of the senior responsible women, wasn't chanting regularly, then certainly the new woman under her weren't either. This was the manager's fault. Prabhupada had praised and encouraged his disciples for laboring hard to renovate the temple and for going out daily into the streets to chant and distribute magazines. But for a devotee to not chant the prescribed rounds was to neglect the most important instruction. What Nandarani hadn't said was that the temple authorities had told her that chanting all her 16 rounds wasn't necessary as long as she worked. They had told her this, even though Prabhupada clearly instructed his disciples at initiation to always chant at least 16 rounds daily. Then another incident. During the morning class, Prabhupada was discussing Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya, an associate of Lord Chaitanya. Looking among the devotees, he asked, "Who can tell me who is Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya?" No one spoke. Prabhupada waited. "None of you can tell me who is Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya?" he asked. One girl raised her hand. She had read something about him. That was all. "Aren't you ashamed?" Prabhupada looked at the men. "You should be the leaders. If the men cannot advance, then the women cannot advance. You must be Brahmanas. Then your wives will be Brahmanas. But if you are not Brahmanas, then what can they do?" Without improving their chanting and without reading Krishna conscious literature, Prabhupada said, they would never attain the purity necessary for preaching Lord Chaitanya's message. While local anomalies were weighing heavily on Srila Prabhupada, he learned of strange things his disciples in India had written in their letters, and he became more disturbed. One letter to devotees in America reported that Prabhupada's godbrother in India objected to his title Prabhupada. According to them, only Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati should be called Prabhupada, and they referred to Prabhupada as Swami Maharaj. Prabhupada also learned that some of his disciples were saying he was not the only spiritual master. They were interested in reading Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati's books as if to discover some new teaching Prabhupada had not yet revealed. Prabhupada regarded these remarks as dangerous for ISKCON. Advancement in spiritual life was based on implicit faith in the spiritual master, and to Prabhupada, these new ideas indicated a relative conception as opposed to the absolute conception of the spiritual master. Such a conception could destroy all he had established, at least it could destroy the spiritual life of anyone who held it. Though sometimes ignorant, his disciples he knew were not malicious. Yet these letters from India carried a spiritual disease transmitted by several of Prabhupada's godbrothers to his disciples there. Prabhupada had already been troubled when some of his godbrothers had refused to help him secure land in Mayapur, the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya. Although he had asked them to help his inexperienced disciples purchase land, they had not complied. In fact, some of them had worked against him. Prabhupada had written to one of his godbrothers, "I am sorry to learn that there is a sort of conspiracy by some of our godbrothers as not to give me a place at Mayapur." Prabhupada was sensitive to any threat to ISKCON. His accepting the name Prabhupada is teaching that the disciples must approach the spiritual master as a direct representative of Krishna without attempting to jump over him to the previous spiritual masters. These things he had carefully explained to his disciples. But now, a few irresponsibly spoken remarks in India were weakening the faith of some of his disciples. Perhaps this insidious contamination that was now spreading had precipitated the blunders at ISKCON Press and even the discrepancies in Los Angeles. Talks about the relative position of the spiritual master could only be the workings of Maya, the Lord's illusory energy. Maya was attempting to bewilder the devotees of ISKCON. That was her job, to lead the conditional souls away from Krishna's service. The recent events began to hamper Prabhupada's writing. He had been working quickly in Los Angeles and had recently finished the second and third volume of Krishna. And on the very tape on which he had dictated the last chapter of Krishna, he had immediately begun a summary of 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Gradually, however, his writings stopped. Karandhara. Prabhupada's translating would require a great deal of concentration. He would have two or three of his big Bhagavatam volumes opened up and sometimes a number of other small books which he would refer to for something or other. He would sit wearing his glasses and speaking into his dictating machine, and he would be completely absorbed in reading. Sometimes he would make a brief note, then look into one of his books, then open another book, turn back to another page, make a note, and then dictate. It required a great deal of concentration. I think that's why Prabhupada did most of it at night after he would rise from his late evening nap. From 1 or 2 in morning until 6 or 7 in the morning, he would be absorbed. It was a quiet It was quiet at that time, and he could become absorbed. But when Prabhupada became disturbed about the problems in ISKCON, it inhibited his work. He was spending his time discussing with visiting devotees or myself or whoever was there. Then he would spend more time thinking matters over or pondering the problem, and wouldn't be able to concentrate on his translating. These difficulties disturbed him, and he would think about them and say, I have not been able to concentrate. I have been thinking about this problem. Although the spiritual master suffers for his disciples' mistakes, Prabhupada's perspective was not simply negative. He continued chanting and lecturing in the temple and inviting the leaders of his movement to visit him in ideal center of Los Angeles. But he also corrected the diseased mentality wherever it appeared. When, for example, Gurudas wrote from London to say that they had allowed an Indian guest to lecture in temple while sitting on Prabhupada's Vyasasan, Prabhupada immediately wrote back correcting him. I am surprised how you allowed Mr. Parikh to sit on the Vyasasan. You know that Vyasasan is meant for the representative of Vyasa, Dev, the spiritual master. But Mr. Parikh does not come in the parampara to become the representative of Vyas. Neither does he had any sound knowledge of Vaishnava philosophy. I understand from your letter that sometimes discussions on Aurobindo philosophy are done by Mr. Parikh from the Vyasasan. So I am little surprised how did you allow like this. I think you should rectify immediately all these mistakes as stated by you in the last two lines of your letter. I think the best thing to do is to stop this class. Nonetheless, nonsense ought not to be tolerated. In a letter from Paris, Tamal Krishna asked Prabhupada a philosophical question about the perfection of spiritual master, and Prabhupada answered fully but sternly. A spiritual master is always liberated. In any condition of his life, he should not be mistaken as an ordinary human being. This position of spiritual master is achieved by three processes. One is called Siddha. That means one who is liberated by executing the regulative principles of devotional service. Another is Kripa Siddha, one who is liberated by the mercy of Krishna or his devotee. And another is Nitya Siddha, who is never forgotten of Krishna throughout his whole life. These are the three features of perfection of life. So far, Narad Muni is concerned, in his previous life he was a maidservant son, but by the mercy of Krishna, by the mercy of devotees, he later on became Siddha, and next life he appeared as Narada, with complete freedom to move anywhere by the grace of the Lord. So even though he was in the previous life a maidservant son, there was no impediment in the achievement of his perfectional spiritual life. Similarly, any living entity who is conditioned can achieve the perfectional stage of life above by the above mentioned processes, and vivid example is Narad Muni. So I do not know why you have asked about my previous life, whether I was subjected to the laws of material nature. So even though accepting that I was subject to law of material nature, does it hamper in my becoming spiritual master? What is your opinion? From the life of Narad Muni, it is distinct that although he was a conditioned soul in his previous life, there was no impediment of his becoming the spiritual master. This law is applicable not only to the spiritual master but to every living entity. So far I am concerned, I cannot say what I was in my past previous life, but one great astrologer calculated that I was previously a physician and my life was sinless. Besides that, to corroborate the statement of Bhagavad Gita, Suchinam Srimatam Gehe Yoga Brishta Abhijayate, which means an unfinished yogi takes birth in rich family or born of a Suchi or a pious father. By the grace of Krishna, I got these two opportunities in the present life to be born of a pious father and brought up in one of the richest aristocratic families of Calcutta, Kashinath Mullik. Radhakrishna deity in this family called me to meet him, and therefore, last time when I was in Calcutta, I stayed in that temple along with my American disciples. Although I had immense opportunities to indulge in the four principles of sinful life because I was connected with very aristocratic family, Krishna always saved me. And throughout my whole life, I do not know what is illicit sex, intoxication, meat eating, or gambling. So far my present life is concerned, I do not remember any part of my life when I was forgetful of Krishna. Prabhupada thought some of his leaders had become entangled in ISKCON management and were trying to gain control for themselves. In the classes, he would speak of this only indirectly, as he had when he had exposed that the devotees weren't chanting and reading enough. Consequently, most devotees were unaware of Prabhupada's anxiety, but occasionally, while sitting in his room or in the garden, Prabhupada would express his concern. He wanted his disciples to manage the ISKCON, but to do so they must be pure. Only then would he be able to concentrate on writing books. In June, he wrote to Brahmananda, now my desire is that I completely devote my time in the matter of writing and translating books, and arrangement should be done that our society be managed automatically. I think we should have a central governing body for dealing with important matters. I have already talked with Gargamuni about this. So if you come back to by Rath Yatra festival, we can have a preliminary meeting at San Francisco in this connection. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you for this important and wonderful narration.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very nice. lot of things, historical as well as spiritual aspects covered in this part.
Yes, thank you, Prabhuji. Yes, it was very nice. The problems that Prabhupada was feeling in management, yeah. Like you said many times, that management is, yeah, like a chaos. All the time and brain goes there. And no time for other things.
Yeah, when all things go there, then very less time to focus on writing, reading.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji.
Hare Krishna, Dhanikali Maharaj. You wanted to say something or? No.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji. Yes, it was really nice, Prabhuji, the session. And I like some of the points. Like one is like cleaning the dishes of the God is equal to the cleaning of heart. Yeah, I really take that point, which is really interesting for me.
Yeah. No, I mean that I think I have come across, but more interesting was that even cleaning the heart of spiritual master.
Yes, yes, Prabhuji.
That is something.
Yeah, it's really new, Prabhuji. Yeah.
So we
Nice
can also
point.
serve the spiritual master by this process.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Of course, we should never mistake him that he has some heart disease, or he has some impurities in heart. We should never think like that. But yeah, it's a service that we are offering. Just like we know this in Vaikunta, Jaya and Vijaya were guarding the Lord, right? So when 4 Kumaras came, then he stopped. They stopped. So we know that there are 7 doors and there are guards 7 doors. Now the question is, in Vaikunta, what kind of disturbance can be? Why are there need of guards? Personally, Mataji, isn't it? Why do we need guards in the safest place?
Yes,
when everything is under the control of the Lord, yeah. So when he wants privacy, no one can peep in, right?
Yeah, Prabhuji, but yeah, he keeps everything for a purpose. Only it's not like without purpose. It's only just we are not able to understand. It happens like this, that we only see one unidirectionally. Oh, the guards are there just to safeguard. We just think the purpose of guard is one way only. But
but there we see also that the Lord doesn't need the guard.
Yeah.
But he wants yeah, he is allowing us that we could serve him like that.
Yeah, the opportunity, yes.
So he is giving the opportunity. Similarly, here we see that spiritual master heart is anyway pure, but there are also ways, yeah, through which we can also serve, right? Sometimes don't we think that, yeah, okay, I want to do some vapu seva, yeah, serving the Lord, serving the spiritual master directly. So this is one way, cleaning the heart. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yes. Okay. Anything else to add or share before we close the call? No, then yeah. Talk to you tomorrow. Vanchakalpatarabhyascha kripasindhubhyo vacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Śrīla Prabhupāda ki jai, Śrīla Gurudev ki jai. Satsvarup Goswami Maharaj ki jai. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you, Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.